you ready? From the beauty of the mountains, PMI Ghana welcomes you to Sogakope for the 2021 PMI Conference. Learn, share, network, expand your horizon. Theme: Transforming Businesses Through Project Management and Digitalization. Date is July 29 to 30th, 2021. Be inspired to innovate all in one space. Platinum sponsors: PMI, Nocheski, Hatwa On Point, Bust. Gold sponsor: Afrisons. Silver sponsor: Baroque Ventures Limited. Virtual platform by Moxie. And powered by Eagle Eye Projects and Events. Of day one of the 2021 National Project Management Conference happening live here at the Sogakope Beach Resort under the theme Transforming Businesses Through Project Management and Digitalization. To go on, ladies and gentlemen, we have an amazing speaker coming up next. Yes, she's already smiling and laughing. When it comes to what we're going to be discussing in this part, which is leadership in the digital era, she has pretty much, I would say, 95 to 99% proficiency in the subject of leadership. Now to couple it with the digital era which we find ourselves, which wasn't really the case about a decade ago. To go on, ladies and gentlemen, this lady, that before I'd introduce her, just as a short profile, she has a bachelor's in political science from Harvard University, yes, in Boston, Massachusetts, yes, an amazing place. Then you know that anybody who comes from Boston automatically has something to do with law, right? Yes. So with Boston Legal Matters, you know that she would have gone on ahead to have a doctorate. Once again, let me just get this correct. Sorry. A Juris Doctorate in Law from Columbia University in New York. So yes, I knew that there was something to do with law right after that. However, she is a leadership and organizational development practitioner, also a facilitator and a certified coach and speaker. Not to say that she is the CEO of Busara Africa, a Pan-African leadership development firm, where she embarks on a lot of work with over 20 years of experience working with civil society, the private sector, and various government agencies across Africa, Europe, and the United States. Please, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome.
For purpose to be relevant to this digital era. And again, what does that mean in reality? It's going to mean certain things are going to be out. Certain ways of practicing leadership, I hope after today, when you leave this room, you're like, I'm not going to do that anymore. But it also means certain things are going to be in. And some of those things that are in, hopefully, are some things that you have already been doing, that you will continue to do. But there might also be some new ways of doing things. And therefore, my song constantly is that leaders have got to change the way they are leading. So what I hope to share with you today is about what's in and what's out. And as I start to go through, one of my key ethos approach to leadership development is to start from the inside out. So as I go through the list, please don't be thinking of other people. Please start looking at yourself. This is really about self. As I go through the list, you're thinking, okay, am I practicing those things that are out? And am I practicing those things that are in? So I'm holding up a mirror now as I start to go through the list of what's in and what's out. All right, let's start with what is out. Okay, let's start with what is out. The first thing that is out, seems fairly obvious, is the command and conquer, top-down leadership style. And it's so interesting because it almost seems so obvious to say this, but as a leadership development practitioner, I'm always bemused how so often I walk into companies and organizations, and this is the dominant style of leadership. It's like, I am the leader, I'm the manager, I'm the GM, I'm the director, I'm essentially Oga at the top, and what I say goes. And we're just so comfortable with that style of leadership. So that's the first thing that needs to go, because I think as we're already starting to learn, hearing from Otama, the kind of agility that you need, the kind of adaptability that you need, if you have this style of leadership, you can well imagine how your team is going to behave. They will be stifled. They will feel like, I don't want to try this thing. If I fail, you know what will happen? Everybody will be down on me. If I succeed, guess what happens? The boss takes full credit. So of course, then people won't step out. They won't be innovative. And yet in a digital era, it's obvious. What do we need? We need innovation. We need creativity. We've already talked about this before. And we can imagine what this style of leadership does to people's creativity. The second thing is this myth I've heard of. When people are going through a digital transformation, they think, oh, who do I get to lead this project? We need to get somebody who's very strong on technology. And that's all. That's all they know, technology. While it's important to get people whose strengths are in technology, I think as her ladyship was already talking about before, many times change is about human beings. So you need people who are not just strong on technology, but people who are equally strong in terms of how they work with other human beings. So what's out is the idea that, all I need to do is be a tech whiz, and then I'm good to go in terms of technology or digital transformation. That's out. What else is out? Overly bureaucratic leaders. Those who are like, okay, it has to be exactly, and I could understand with her ladyship, where she talks about in the context of the judiciary following the law and policies, in certain contexts, particularly issues around safety, things like that, you can't be deviating. But too often, I see leaders who, for no reason, but the fact that, we've always done it this way, just decide, no, it has to go through. I'm not willing to think about, well, maybe we could do it differently. Maybe we could be actually a lot more efficient. But instead, they're constantly being overly bureaucratic. Again, you can imagine what that impact is on innovation, agility, adaptability. It stifles it. So overly bureaucratic leadership is out unless you really need it for safety, legal reasons and stuff. The other type of leadership that's out is leaders that are very internally focused. And when I mean internally focused, I don't mean inside of them. I mean internally focused in terms of all they see is their teams, their companies, their business. They are not comfortable looking outwards and scanning the environment to see what's coming out. They are not comfortable networking, leveraging alliances with others, because all their comfort zone is, it's my company and my team. So these are the kind of leaders, if they're in a big organization, all they want to work with is their team. They, it's those silos, and they're like, I'm just going to be focused on my team. If we achieve our results, that's good enough for me. That type of leadership is out, because again, I think many of you have seen that some of the opportunities in the market from digital transformation don't happen by teams working on their own. They don't happen by companies working on their own. They happen when people come together and leverage their various strengths. So if you're only internally focused, you will completely miss what's potentially happening on the horizon. The other type of leadership that's out, and now again, really look at yourselves closely, is when you start to think, how do I influence my people to achieve results? For many of you, it's pure carrot and stick. That's the level of your incentivization framework. You're like, okay, if you do really well, then I will praise you, yeah, and maybe we'll take you out for lunch, we'll give you some performance. If you don't do well, I query you. Actually, what we have found is leadership has moved on. It's about getting people to buy into your vision, getting people to see the real benefits of the transformation that you're seeking to bring out, so that you don't have to do this kind of carrot and stick thing like people are donkeys or something that you constantly have to be. We're looking for much more sophisticated isolated type of leadership. So that's something else to also pay attention to. Increasingly, that's also out. And so I leave you with this question. Are you that type of leader? Are you practicing this old style of leadership? Because that is out. So you might be saying, okay, that's fine, Taaka, so what is in? What is the type of leadership that's really required for this digital era? First thing, which again is quite obvious, are visionary leaders. Leaders who can really dream of possibilities, things that we couldn't even see before. Because often, when you're trying to bring about a transformation and you have this wonderful idea, people will be like, I don't know about that. So it's about the ability to describe what you see and inspire others to follow you along a path that has yet to be realized. So that's the first thing that's really out in visionary leaders. The second thing that's really in a critical competence in the context of the digital era are leaders who can create a culture of learning and innovation within their teams or organizations. And I think, again, this one is fairly obvious about the importance of innovation. But this idea of learning, it's sometimes things come out of my mouth very quickly, but I don't mean to imply that they're easy. That many of them are it's more easily said than done. Particularly this culture of learning. Many of us have been socialized by our education system to think about learning in a very narrow way. We think about learning in a very academic way. So we think about learning as a course we take, like the PMI one. We study. And then we get a certificate on, we have learned. But we're talking about a lot more than knowledge. We're talking about learning different ways of being, showing up, and thinking. And to be able to do that as a leader, to encourage it, you need to have a culture of that. And you will see that's something I'm going to be emphasizing quite a bit, this idea of organizational culture. Because when you create a culture of learning, even if somebody hasn't been used to learning in this very practical way in their previous jobs, when they walk into an organization, they're like, so this is how we do it around here. In PMI, this is how we learn around here. For instance, we don't just learn from books, we learn from mistakes. When something doesn't go wrong, it's not about blaming. When something doesn't go right, it's not about blaming. When something doesn't go right, we notice the culture around here as we stop to evaluate what could we have done differently. That's a culture of learning. So it's about creating the culture, not just you yourself constantly learning. It's about doing different things as a leader to influence people to constantly learn, not just from their books, but to learn from their experience. It's about, if we're talking about being agile and adaptable, it's about creating a culture where people are constantly learning to improve as they go along. And particularly if you're talking about technology, that ability to constantly shift, improve, strengthen is a key aspect of learning that's embedded in culture. Closely tied to this, naturally, what's in are leaders who use an innovative, fluid, collaborative, and agile approach. These are Otema's power skills. This is what PMI talks about, the power skills. These, I would say, are such an asset for leadership in the digital era. It's also, therefore, again, it's not just about you as a leader using these particular approaches, but again, constantly it's about creating a culture, whether it's a culture even within your smaller team, but it's creating an organizational culture that's innovative, fluid, collaborative, and creative. Again, I ask you the question, are you that type of a leader? What else is in? It's leaders with interdisciplinary skills. Again, I think either it was, Autumn, I think you talked about this morning, eh? It's the leaders with interdisciplinary skills, not just one skill set. It's about leaders who have a diverse understanding of different corporate functions, industries, and technologies. And again, sometimes I think our education system has done us a disservice where very early on, many of us get pigeonholed. Oh, okay, you're the engineer, you're the lawyer, you're the accountant. But it's saying it's coming out of those paradigms to start to say, how do I become a well-rounded leader whose skill set can look and cover a wide range of functions, industries, and technologies? That becomes an asset for my team. Because again, it enables my team to be able to leverage different opportunities as they come up. The next one then, and this is the biggie, and I think this is what Lady Justice was alluding to. What is really in, and I tell you, I have seen this consistently in the last 2 years, it's leaders who can drive change and transform their businesses and organizations. I noticed that since 2020, since the pandemic, almost literally about 80% of my work in terms of organizational development consulting, I have been doing to senior leaders in a number of, what would I call it, international organizations, has focused on this specific thing. How do you drive and lead change? It is keeping leaders awake at night. Because many people are not prepared with a skill set to know, all right, they may have a vision. It's one thing to have a vision. You can clearly see the landscape has changed, the market has changed. My business, my organization has to pivot in order to do this. We have to go through a digital transformation. You can see it. The question is bringing everybody behind you in that process. That is what leading change is about. I've seen too many leaders, the brilliant vision, they're far ahead. And guess what? Nobody's following them. And then many times in our culture, we don't say it out loud. We don't say, no, we don't see it. We are not convinced. Instead, we just carry on doing the old way. And people wonder, why is this project not working? Why is this thing not working? Because you have not learned how to lead change where you bring everybody on board with you. So that's a huge thing that's in terms of your leadership skill set and competencies. Learn how to lead change. Yeah? The next one too is, and this part I really want to focus on the aspect of inclusion. What's in are leaders who can create a culture of inclusion. I've already talked about learning, collaboration, and innovation. So I want to focus on inclusion. Because there was something, again, that her ladyship mentioned. I thought, this is interesting. She was mentioning the idea that the e-justice project, by reducing the transactional costs of having to deal with the justice system, is actually increasing access to justice. And I thought, absolutely fantastic. I thought, how wonderful to see technology being used to increase access and equity. Because often what happens is that if we are not careful, technology can actually increase inequality. So we need leaders who are very mindful as they're going through digital transformation of their organizations. So we need leaders who, as they're going through the process of digital transformation, are really paying attention to these issues of inclusion. I know how many of you remember last year when all of a sudden many schools had to go online. Now we know what that meant in terms of access to education for millions of Ghanaian children who could not register register into a Zoom Google Classroom because they simply didn't have the internet. The other day as well, I had traveled out of Ghana to go to my other home. I know many of you are wondering where is she actually from? So I left my home Ghana to go to my other home. And as I was coming back at the airport, I noticed that, and many of you, I know many of us have reduced our traveling around this period, but we had to fill in the COVID. You know, naturally you pay for the COVID test before you get here. But there was one other form they hadn't told us we needed to fill in. So when we arrived at Kotoka, they were saying, okay, can you please get out your phones and download the app and fill in the... And I noticed there were a group, I came on Ethiopian, there were a group of young men and women, many of those who are contract workers in Dubai, and they usually use Ethiopian. So for many of them it was like, not all of them had smartphones, first of all. Not all of them were completely conversant. Some of the young ones, because they were young, could do it. But I could see some of the older ones were like, download which app to do which. And I just thought, who thought of this? Were they thinking equity? There are many people who still travel who have their yam phones. But it's a mindset. So as we start to deploy technology, it's so important for us leaders, for us to be thinking inclusion, not just in terms of our customers, our clients, but also internally. What does the digital transformation mean in our organization in terms of who has access to it, in terms of whose job becomes more efficient? Yeah? So this inclusive leadership is definitely an in. And finally, the set of what's in. It's leaders who can develop leaders that exist at all levels of the organization, not just at the top. I think what we're finding about the digital era is that the next brilliant idea that will transform your company and make it be able to seize the moment, to make it disruptive in the market, will not come from your senior management team. It may not come from Exco. It may come from your front line employees and staff who are seeing the problem. You were talking about, Otem was talking about an entrepreneurial spirit. To me, entrepreneurs see problems and they immediately think of solutions, business solutions to those problems. So you're able to see problems that customers and clients are facing, and immediately you think, ooh, this is the way our business, with the help of technology, can respond to that. But you, sitting in the boardroom on the 7th floor, who is not interfacing with your constituents, clients, or customers, may not see that. It might be your frontline employee who can see that. Now, when you foster leadership at all levels of the organization, it means your frontline employee can feel empowered enough to say, okay, I too can influence how things are done here. I'm going to speak up to influence this company to take advantage of this. If they don't have that sense of leadership, they'll say, anyway, how do we say? It's not my father. Is it my father's job? Or is it my father's company? I think that's the saying I've heard. It's not my father's company, so why should I speak? And that's just the mindset we're trying to shift. So when everybody sees themselves as a leader, they're like, this is an opportunity that we can seize through digital transformation, and they're willing to speak up and influence it. It's about leaders who are constantly scanning the environment to determine where the next digital disruption is coming. So you're not waiting to be disrupted, you are becoming the disruptor. But that doesn't happen if all you're doing is looking inward. It happens when you're constantly scanning the environment and learning. And it's leaders who are strategically networked so they can leverage opportunities in the market through, again, strategic partnerships. Seizing opportunities sometimes is quite hard to do on your own. But sometimes maybe if you come together in a coalition, in an alliance with another company, then you're able to seize that opportunity. But how would you know that unless you have those networks and relationships in advance? And so I ask you again, Are you that type of leader? So I've given you a sense of what's in and what's out. And therefore, my second simple message to you today is that as leaders, we need to be constantly assessing and adjusting our leadership styles to be fit for the digital era. Please, I know some of you have been managing and leading people for 20, 25 years or more. That doesn't mean now you can say, oh, Taaka, been there, done it, I have my MBA, I've got my... It's about constantly being willing to pivot and adjust how you do leadership to ensure it's fit for purpose. That's my second message for you today. But I have some bad news. Some really tough news. And this comes from the fact that I've done leadership development for years. I've had workshops. Some of you have been part of my trainings. I've done workshops. People are like, yes, Taaka, I know it is true. You go back, and guess what? You go back to the old ways of doing things. So that even if you are convinced, even if it does make sense as you're listening to me, that, yeah, actually, I really do need to look at my leadership style. I need to look at my approaches. I need to make them more relevant to the digital era. The reality is it is easier said than done. So what does that mean? I would like to leave you with two quick strategies that can help you overcome this burden you will face when you actually seek to implement what you now know. And before I do that, let me explain a little bit about why it is easier said than done. Why is changing our approach to leadership quite difficult? Because I keep seeing folks struggling with this. The first reason, and this will help you in terms of how do I therefore overcome the hurdle, the first thing is that our understanding and ideology of leadership is outdated. Too many of us still think of leadership as the oga at the top. We still think of leadership as belonging or to be practiced only by those who have titles, aka manager, supervisor, GM, director, CEO, whatever you are, chairman, chairlady. To us, when we think about leaders, that's who we think. So as long as we think about leadership in that outdated way, then it's always going to get in our way. The other thing is, too often we think about leadership as a noun, not a verb. So many people think, I'm a leader now, as if because they're a leader, now they've gotten promoted, that's it, they're done. I know very many people in leadership roles who do not practice any leadership. They don't influence anyone. If anything, people only do things because they're so afraid if they don't do it, they will be fired. And as soon as nobody's watching them, you know what they do? They do their own thing. So to me, that's not really leadership, because leadership is about influencing people, not scaring the bejesus out of people to get things done. Yeah? So it's our thinking of leadership. Unless you change how you think about leadership, you'll find it quite hard as you leave this room to actually put this learning into practice. Another reason I'm preparing you, why it may be difficult, but still manageable, is that our organizational and leadership culture is outdated. And I'm such a deep believer, I've just said it, about the power of organizational culture. Because so many times people will say to me, as Ghanaians, we don't respect time, we're not serious about certain things, and then I'll say, But when we go to Germany and we look and see who are some of the most committed, dedicated employees, are they not Ghanaians? When we go to my old home, Boston, I will see Ghanaians in top level positions. Are they not the same Ghanaians? So what is the difference. In those contexts, they're working for companies and organizations where the culture is, over here, 8 o'clock is 8 o'clock. No ifs, whats, buts. Huh? For here, when I say the report is due on Tuesday, it's due on Tuesday. That's how we roll around here. So the culture enables people to shift. They walk in and they're like, so this is how things work around here. Let me adjust myself. So when you focus on culture, when you work in a culture where the leadership culture is all about top-down, you may say, I've come from PMI, I heard Taaka, now I'm coming to do an empowering thing. You walk in and you're like, but everybody else is doing something different. When I want to empower my people, I can see in the other team, the other manager is doing something very different. People start complaining. So it's recognizing that part of the challenge is the organizational and leadership culture that you will face. It's recognizing that this is a reality that gets in our way. The other challenge that makes it hard is that many of our companies, trust me, I've seen, I really celebrate the ones who are different, but very many don't invest in leadership development. There is an assumption that if you're in the job long enough, you just keep going up. And somehow you will just kind of figure it out in terms of how to lead people. So too often people get promoted into incompetence. Isn't that true? Because as they get more and more senior, often what's required of them is not the technical aspects of the role. As they get more and more senior, what's required of them is the ability to inspire, facilitate, provide a vision. But all they have are the technical aspects of their jobs. Nobody ever taught them how to inspire people. Nobody ever taught them how to lead change. Nobody ever taught them how to develop, coach, and mentor others. Nobody taught them the power skills that Otema was talking about. And even when you have companies who are indeed investing in leadership development, often it's focused on theory. Go do an MBA, often not enough of the practical skills. Yeah? So I'll end with my final message, which is my last message. My third and last message. To overcome these barriers that I just mentioned, if you're really committed to ensuring that your leadership approach and style is relevant for the digital era, focus on two things. Number one, focus on changing yourself from the inside out. Quite often, many of the power skills that PMI is focusing on, empathy, collaboration, all of those skills are developed when you are able to do the inner work. Building up your self-confidence, managing your ego. To be empathetic, to be able to collaborate with others means some very basic things that we have to manage our egos. That's what I mean doing the change from the inside out. So start with self. Those of you who know me know I always sing the song, you can't lead another until you lead yourself. So that's the place to start. If you're going to be standing alone, practicing a different type of leadership in a culture where people are doing something else, you need to be courageous. You need to be bold. That means you need to do the inner work to act despite your fear. That's courage. So start with yourself from the inside out. And second, then, is really, if you can, work on the culture. Either it's team culture or the overall organizational culture. It just leverages your ability to make change go further. Never underestimate the power of organizational culture to change behavior. Those are two areas to start. So thank you all so much. Some of the changing self from the inside out means you work on beliefs and mindsets, emotions, skills, and knowledge. Changing organizational culture means you work on values, accountability, capacity development. And again, we'll send these slides so you'll have copies of it. But that's how you would actually do these two areas, yeah? And in conclusion, Leadership, I think I've said it, has to become fit for purpose for the digital era. The old way of practicing leadership cannot continue if our businesses and organizations are to thrive in the new normal. New ways of practicing leadership are needed and required. And changing one's leadership approach is most effective if one focuses on changing from the inside out and changing the organizational culture. Thank you
all. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and for those who are watching us or participating virtually, please know that we're taking some questions for Taaka. And if microphones will go around, either by myself or by any of the assistants that we have or we have today. And then from there, we'll answer them probably in threes or twos. Yes, as and when they're available, yes. Let's do that. And then we have just about 10 minutes to do this. So please, let's be quick with our questions. So you can send through your questions on the platform. If you're virtual with us, send through your questions. It will be read from here. I'll receive them and I'll read them to Taaka, and then they'll be answered. Yes, thank you. So please, anyone with the very first question, that is if you're ready. I believe you're ready as well, so we can go ahead, yes.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Jonathan. Right. Now I want to find out, sometimes, well, I'm saying this from experience, right? You realize that as a leader, your fellow leaders actually have a different mindset. In fact, they're all thinking, what is in it for me, what is in it for me, what is in it for me. And you get to realize that you are the only one thinking differently. How do you influence change in such an environment? Thank you.
Another question, Taaka.
Thank you very much. Stirring presentation as always. My question relates to your point about inclusion. And it's one that really challenged me because of how you positioned it. And if I look back at the last 10 years of my career, it's really have been about transformation and trying to take people along for the journey. Now, there's something I can't reconcile, and I'd like your views on that, which is that there is always a kind of a cutoff or a limit to how inclusive you might be able to be in particular contexts. You may be trying to take people along for the journey, and you may realize that some people just aren't cut out. At least that's the way that it's interpreted sometimes. So therefore, you kind of say, okay, not everybody is going to make it to the promised land. So therefore, those that are ready, we take them, and the rest, well, that's just the way it's got to be. How does that position or that thinking that relate to your ideas around inclusion?
Thank you, Taaka, for your presentation. You made mention of the fact that one of the characteristics of a leader is to be able to develop other leaders across all levels. And also, as a leader, you should be able to change the organizational culture and maybe politics within the organization. My concern is that if you work in a typical functional organizational structure, where perhaps the project manager reports to a functional manager who is not a project manager, and you are leading team members who think that, yes, of course, they actually have access to the one at the top. Okay, so if you step on their toes, then you are stepping on an executive toe, so to speak. Now, how will it be possible for you as a leader to change this organizational culture and politics in practical terms? Thank you.
Okay, good. I think it's on. Okay, so thanks very much for your questions. Jonathan, on how, and this is such a reality, and thank you for sharing the fact that this is indeed your reality, where you find that you are practicing leadership in one way, with a certain approach, and then you see your fellow managers, supervisors, or whatever their titles are doing it another way. How do you influence? one of the ways I found that's quite powerful to influence a change in behavior and leadership approach is to show results. Otema before was talking about the entrepreneurial spirit. As entrepreneurs, we're very conscious about outcomes. When one is able to show that your leadership approach is powerful, not just because it empowers people, not because it gives people room to innovate, but because by empowering people, giving people room to innovate, you're able to deliver results. That's a powerful way of influencing others. So I would say it's really be able to show the connection between this leadership approach works because it delivers the results that our company or organization is seeking to achieve. Then going to the question, thank you so much for the question around inclusion. And inclusion has come up in different respects, particularly as one is trying to drive change. I work with a particular international NGO that is going through a change process, and it is clear that the impact of that change process and restructuring will mean that certain people in the organization who had power before will lose power because their jobs will be reorganized. So you can well imagine they are fighting tooth and nail to resist this change. Yet at the same time, the leaders who are managing the change are trying to do so in a way where they're saying, we don't want to leave anybody behind. We want to be inclusive and participatory as possible. But each time they try and take 2 steps forward, there are people who are not thinking about the company. They're thinking about themselves and, hey, will I still have my power? Will I still have my job? You know, sometimes natural for people to think about their livelihoods. So at a certain point, I think what those leaders have had to do is, number one, make sure that their change management process is as participatory and inclusive as possible. And then eventually it's like you come along, and not, as I say, it's not by force. This is not, these are jobs where if you're willing to go along with our new direction, then you're welcome. We've consulted on you, but there is a cutoff point. And they're able to feel confident about that cutoff point because of the type of process that they've had before. And they've been open really to being challenged. For instance, in another organization, they've been challenged about the fact that, will this transformation harm those who are less skilled? Will it have a negative impact on those? They're an international one, so they're thinking about people with disabilities, people of color, people who are on contracts as opposed to permanent workers. So they have been willing to have that hard look at, is there a differential impact of what we're proposing on these different groups of people? And when they're comfortable that they have made their adjustments so that there's equality of opportunity, and that they are not unintentionally, without some form of bias, hurting people, then they're confident that we've done everything we can. So a lot of your confidence comes from the process to ensure that the outcome is the right one, even though it might mean not everybody comes along with you. Okay. And then to the final question, which I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I fully understood it, but the whole aspect of stepping on toes and the hierarchy and all, and how does one change? I think the essence of the question I heard, where can somebody raise their hand? I could hear your voice, but I couldn't see you. If I got, was the essence of your question, how does one change that organizational culture? I wasn't sure I was getting the essence.
Yes, so my question is that how feasible it is to be able to change the organizational culture. Looking at the fact that at least people have different minds. People think that yes, okay, they have access to the one at the top. Okay, and so if you step on his toes or her toes, then you are stepping on an executive tool. How can you change that mindset?
Nice. Okay.
My name is Richard Latte.
Richard, okay. As I say, I'm doing the understandings. Okay, now I get you. And a very real challenge I've seen in some companies. Often, you see, it's very interesting. You started with the thing, how feasible is it to change the organizational culture? It means already, Richard, you have in your mindset that it's almost impossible. Whereas, I think the question is, where do I start in seeking to influence the organizational culture? And I often say, start in your sphere of influence. So you might not, particularly in that kind of context that you're talking about, Richard, where stepping on somebody's toes who is protected means stepping on their godfather or something like that. You might need to be careful with that. But many of us underestimate our spheres of influence. And it's often a group of people, our teams, those around us, who increasingly, first we start by the power of our example. You can't lead another until you lead yourself. The power of your example, Richard, and then starting with your power of your example to start to influence those around you. So you're not jumping to change the organizational culture of your entire company and organization overnight. You're right, we have to be realistic. It's being able to say, where can you start? Start small and show results as you start to change.
All right, Taaka, we're really pressed for time, ladies and gentlemen. So let's take the last two questions from our virtual platform. This one from Bernard Arthur says, how do we drive these changes if we are not in leadership positions ourselves? That is, if we can. And then the last one from Jephthah Ejog says, most are working low in the chain of management or have less visibility. How do you impact changes without affecting your current role?
And because the two questions are connected, you can see behind the two questions is the implication that you influence as a leader when you have a title. And again, back to my initial premise, leadership is about influencing others to achieve a shared goal. You don't need a title to influence others. You don't need a title to display leadership. Start for the two online, in fact I should be looking here because I think they're here, right? I'm looking at you all because you're right in front of you, but it's really about starting where you are, starting, as I just mentioned earlier, with those around you, starting with the power of your example. And in fact, I'm going back to something that Otema said, where she talked about leaning onto your power, recognizing your power. I think too many of us underestimate the power we have, the influence that we have, because we've defined our influence by the titles and roles that we have. Forgetting that sometimes the most influential person is not the person who has the title of CEO, but it's the person who honors their word, the person who steps up, the one who delivers results, the one who is always committed to speaking truth to power and doesn't hide back, the one who delivers 200%, the one who's confident enough to come up with an idea and say, oh God, this is an idea I have, the one who organizes themselves financially so they can walk away from a job that is not lining with their values. Those are often the leaders we have, not the ones with the title. So those online, the two that ask the question, I would say start with leading self. Often as you lead self, you become a powerful example in influencing others. Yeah? But thank you all so much. This has been really interesting engaging with you. Atu, I think I'll hand back over to you since you're pressed for time.
Give you the